The morning Haley Voss Renner, 37 years old, director of the Cedarline Community Trust and wife of Garrett Renner, walked into the glass-walled boardroom of Renner Aldgate Partners. She was still wearing the lanyard from the charity gala the night before. She had not slept. She had driven 40 minutes through a February snowstorm from the event venue in Burlington to the firm's Mississauga office because someone from the accounting team had left her a voicemail at 11:15 p.m., voice low and careful, saying only that she needed to see the Q3 ledgers before the board meeting tomorrow morning. Haley set her coat over the back of her chair and opened her laptop on the long table. The room smelled like stale coffee and the particular kind of quiet that only exists in offices after midnight. She found the discrepancy on page 42. It was not the kind of mistake someone makes accidentally. The vendor account, listed as Aldgate Infrastructure Solutions, had received 11 transfers over 14 months. Each transfer was just under the threshold that would trigger an automatic compliance review. Whoever had set this up knew exactly where the line was. The total moved through that account was $4.3 million. When Haley pulled the vendor registration, the company address was a postal box in Oakville. The incorporation date was 3 weeks after Garrett had been promoted to managing partner. She sat very still for a moment. Outside, the snow was coming down harder. She did not call him. She photographed every page. Garrett Renner, 44 years old, managing partner of Renner Aldgate Partners, had built the firm from a mid-size wealth management boutique into one of the most recognized private investment houses in southern Ontario. He had done this, at least in part, because Haley had spent the first 6 years of their marriage managing the firm's community relations and charitable giving strategy at no salary, building the kind of goodwill that let Renner Aldgate win institutional clients who cared about reputation. She had organized galas, sat on non-profit boards, and once spent 3 weeks coordinating a flood relief fund in coordination with the municipal government in Hamilton, all while being introduced at firm dinners as Garrett's wife, rather than as the person who had designed the public-facing infrastructure that kept the firm's name clean. She had never complained about this. She had simply done the work. Garrett was charming in the way that men who have always been believed tend to be. He had a large laugh and a firm handshake, and he remembered the names of people's children. The partners at the firm adored him, the board trusted him, and for a long time Haley had trusted him too. The first sign had come 8 months earlier, not in a ledger but at a dinner. A woman named Delia had appeared at the firm's summer reception. Introduced as a consultant, Garrett had brought in to advise on digital asset strategy. She was 31 years old, and she stood close to Garrett in the particular way that people stand close to someone they have already spent time alone with. Haley noticed. She noted the way Garrett's hand had moved to Delia's elbow when he introduced her to the senior partners. She noted the way Delia had smiled at Haley with a warmth that was just slightly too practiced. She had not said anything that night. She had instead started paying attention to things she had not been paying attention to before. Garrett's mother, Vivienne Aldgate Renner, 71 years old and co-founder of the original firm, had made her opinion of Haley clear over 11 years of Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings. Vivienne was the kind of woman who gave compliments that landed sideways. She told Haley her hair looked lovely when it was longer. She asked every Christmas whether Haley and Garrett had considered moving somewhere with better schools, the implication being that Haley's failure to produce children was a planning problem rather than a private grief. She had once referred to Haley's work with the trust as a hobby in front of 3 senior partners and their spouses. Haley had smiled. That night, she had sat in the parking lot of the Renner's house in Oakville for 6 minutes before driving home, hands on the wheel, just breathing. When she found the vendor account, she thought about that parking lot. She did not go to the board meeting. She went to her brother's house instead. Theodore Voss, 51 years old, retired Crown attorney, and the person who had put Haley through her MBA after their parents died, lived in a narrow Victorian row house in Hamilton's North End. He made her coffee and sat across from her at the kitchen table and looked at the photographs she had taken. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "Does he know you've seen this?" "No," Haley said. "Good," Theodore said. "Don't tell him." She went home that evening. She made dinner. She asked Garrett about his day. He told her the board meeting had gone well, that Q3 was looking strong, that there might be a client dinner in Vancouver next month. Would she be able to come? She said she'd check her calendar. She asked if he wanted more wine. He said yes. She poured it. She watched him the way you watch someone when you are trying to understand how much of what you knew about them was ever real. The next morning, she called her brother's colleague, a civil litigator named Daisy, who had spent 12 years doing financial fraud work before moving into private practice. Adaze listened, asked 4 very precise questions, and said she would need 2 weeks to look at everything properly. "And in the meantime?" Haley asked. "In the meantime," Adaze said, "you keep making dinner." The 2 weeks were the longest of Haley's life. She sat across from Garrett at breakfast and watched him read the news on his phone. She attended a Cedar Line Trust Board meeting and presented the Q2 Impact Report and answered questions about grant disbursement strategy. She went to a yoga class on Thursday morning with a friend from the neighborhood and listened to her friend talk about her kitchen renovation and laughed in the right places. She did all of this while carrying something heavy and invisible, like a stone she had swallowed and could not put down. She also, during those 2 weeks, spent an afternoon at the offices of her late father's estate lawyer. Haley's father, Edmund Voss, had died 11 years ago, shortly after Haley married Garrett. He had been a quiet man, an engineer who had built a modestly successful construction management company over 30 years and then sold it to a larger firm when he retired. What Haley had known about her inheritance was the amount that had transferred into her personal account at the time of his death. What she had not known, what her father had put in trust specifically because he did not want her to know until she was ready, or until she needed it, was that a portion of the acquisition deal had been paid in equity rather than cash. Edmund Voss had held a 12% stake in Voss Harland Infrastructure Group, the acquiring firm, which over 11 years had grown into a construction and land development company with projects across Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia. The stake was now worth significantly more than what Haley had ever imagined. The estate lawyer, a careful man named Mr. Ose, who had known her father for 30 years, handed her a folder and let her read it in his office without interrupting. When she finished, she looked up. "Your father wanted you to have the option of choosing when this became part of your life," Mr. Ose said. "He thought you'd know when you needed it." Haley thought about page 42 of the Q3 ledger. She thought about the postal box in Oakville. She thought about a parking lot in December and 6 minutes of just breathing. "I think I know," she said. Adaze called on a Tuesday morning. The vendor account was a shell company. It had been incorporated by a numbered company registered to a business address that also housed 2 other entities, one of which had a directorship connected to Dahlia. Not directly, there was a layer between them, but Adaze had found the layer. "There's more," Adaze said. "Some of the transfers were authorized with an electronic signature. We pulled the metadata on the authorization documents. 3 of them were signed from a device that was registered to the firm's guest network on days you were working in the office." Haley understood what this meant before Adaze finished the sentence. Garrett had authorized transfers from the office on days Haley was there, using her name. Her name.
"He used my login credentials," she said.
"Not your login," Adaze said. "Your name, on the authorization signatory line, as co-approver. The firm's internal compliance records show you approved those transfers." Haley sat down on the edge of the bed in the guest room, the room she had moved into quietly 3 days earlier, telling Garrett only that she was sleeping badly and didn't want to keep him up. "So if this comes out," she said carefully, "I'm on the record as having approved them." "Yes," Adaze said, "which may be the point." The board meeting was scheduled for a Friday in March. A routine quarterly review plus a vote on a proposed partnership expansion into the U.S. market. 12 board members, 4 senior partners, and a small army of advisors would be in the room. Garrett did not know that Haley had spoken to 3 of those board members in the 10 days prior. He did not know that she had shared a carefully prepared summary of findings, prepared by Adaze, reviewed by Theodore, delivered in person with a full documentation package, with the firm's independent audit chair, a woman named Miss Barbeau who had been on the board for 9 years, and who, had it turned out, had her own questions about the Q3 vendor reconciliation that no one had been able to answer satisfactorily. He did not know that Haley had sent a formal letter to the Ontario Securities Commission, and he did not know that on the morning of the board meeting, Haley's lawyer had filed a notice with the firm's corporate secretary, identifying Haley as a protected whistleblower under the applicable regulatory framework, which meant that any action taken against her in connection with the disclosed information would carry significant legal exposure for the firm and for Garrett personally. Haley was not in the boardroom that morning. She was at the Cedar Line Community Trust, sitting in her office with a cup of tea, going through grant applications for the spring funding cycle. Her phone was face down on the desk. She was not waiting for it. She was just working. At 11:47 a.m., it buzzed. She turned it over and read the message from Theodore, which said only, "It's done. He's out. Call me when you're ready." She set the phone face down again. She finished reading the grant application in front of her. It was from a youth literacy program in Brampton, well-structured, clear outcomes, modest ask. She wrote recommend for full funding in the margin and moved to the next one. What the board had found, once the external auditors were given unrestricted access, was worse than Haley had known. The $4.3 million through the Shell vendor account was only the most recent layer. Below it, buried in capital allocation records going back 5 years, were 2 other irregularities. A series of advisory fee payments to a firm that shared a directorship with Garrett's brother-in-law, and a set of real estate transactions in which the firm had sold a commercial property at below market value to a holding company that Garrett had a personal interest in, which had then resold it 18 months later at full market value, pocketing the difference. The total, across all 3 structures, was over $9 million. Delia, whose consulting contract with the firm had been terminated the same morning as Garrett's partnership, retained her own lawyer and began cooperating with the regulatory investigation within 48 hours. This was not, her lawyer made clear, because she was particularly virtuous. It was because cooperating early was better than not cooperating. Vivienne Aldgate Renner called Haley twice that weekend. Haley did not answer. On the second voicemail, Vivienne's voice was different from how it usually was, lower, without its usual precision. And she said things that Haley had waited 11 years to hear. She said that she had not treated Haley fairly. She said that she had underestimated her. She said she was sorry. Haley listened to the voicemail once, sitting in her car in the driveway of the house. She was already in the process of transferring out of the joint ownership they had set up at the beginning of the marriage. She listened to it all the way through. Then she deleted it and went inside. Garrett's lawyer contacted ADAs in April with a settlement proposal. The terms were generous in the way that settlement proposals are generous when the party proposing them is very worried. There was a financial component, a confidentiality agreement, and a clause that would have had Haley publicly retract the information she had provided to the OSC. Adazi presented it to Haley over the phone. No, Haley said. The financial component is, I know what it is, Haley said. No, she did not explain further. She did not need to. The regulatory process moved slowly, the way these things do. It was not over quickly. There were months of document review, depositions, preliminary hearings. Garrett hired expensive lawyers. His lawyers filed motions. The motions were addressed. The process continued. What Haley found during those months was that she was less angry than she expected to be. She had thought that when the initial numbness wore off, what would be underneath it would be rage. Instead, what she found was something quieter, a kind of clarity. The life she had been living had been built partly on something that was not real, and now she was building something that was. That process was not painless. There were mornings when she sat at her kitchen table and thought about the 11 years and felt the weight of them. There were dinners with friends where she smiled and answered questions and felt underneath the smile a sadness that she did not try to rush. She let herself feel it. She did not try to make the grief neater than it was. She also, during those months, had a series of conversations with Mr. Osi and a financial advisor named Priya about what it meant to actually hold the stake in Voss Harland and what she wanted to do with it. What she decided was this. She did not want to sell. Her father had built something patiently and without much recognition over 30 years, and it had grown into something real. She would keep her seat at the table. She would be present at shareholder meetings. She would pay attention. The Cedarline Community Trust continued its work. The Youth Literacy Program at Brampton received its grant, and in the fall sent Haley a handwritten card signed by 14 children who were learning to read. She put the card on her desk. In November, 9 months after the February night she had sat in a glass-walled boardroom photographing pages of a ledger she was never supposed to see, Haley Voss Renner sat across from her brother at the same kitchen table in Hamilton. Theodore made coffee. Outside it was snowing again, a different snow from the one in February, lighter, the first real snow of the season rather than a storm. "How are you?" he asked. She thought about the question. Theodore was one of the few people she answered honestly. "I'm okay," she said. "I'm actually okay." He looked at her for a moment and then nodded, and they sat there with their coffee while the snow came down outside the window, and the quiet between them was the good kind, the kind that does not need to be filled. She had not taken the settlement. She had not retracted anything. The process was still going, and it would go on for as long as it needed to. She had kept her name exactly as clean as it had always been. What Garrett had not understood when he put her name on those authorization documents was that her name was the one thing in that office that had actually been worth protecting. He had used it as cover. She had simply let it be what it had always been, a record of someone who showed up, did the work and told the truth. That was the part he had never quite managed to see.